Watchman on the Pod. All right, we are going to pick back up in Pawns in the Game by William Guy Carr. We are in chapter 3. I'm looking at all these books as pieces of the puzzle, and they're all going to come together and form the huge picture. You never know. Okay, chapter 3. The men who caused the revolution, the French Revolution, 1789. In the previous chapter, evidence was given to prove how a small group of foreign money lenders operating through their English agents remained anonymous while they secured control of that nation's economy for the modest sum of 1,250,000 liras, or pounds. I think it's pounds. Evidence will now be produced to identify some of these international Zionist moneylenders and prove they or their successors plotted and planned and helped finance the Great French Revolution of 1789. Exactly the same way as they had plotted and planned and financed the English Revolution of 1640 to 1649. In succeeding chapters, evidence will be produced to prove that the descendants of these international Zionist financiers have been the secret power behind every war and revolution from 1789 onwards. The Jewish Encyclopedia says Edom is a modern Jewry. Okay, somebody was trying to call. I had to cancel that. This is a very important admission because the word Edom means red. History reveals that a Jewish goldsmith, Amschel Moses Bauer, which he wasn't Jewish, he's Zionist, converted Jew, tired of his wandering in Eastern Europe, decided in 1750 to settle down in Frankfurt on the Main in Germany. He opened a shop or counting house in the Judenstrasse district. Over the door of his shop, he placed as his sign of business, a red shield. It is of the greatest importance to remember that the Jews in Eastern Europe who belonged to the revolutionary movement based on terrorism had adopted the red flag as their emblem because it represented blood. Amschel Moses Bauer had a son born in 1743, and he named him Amschel Mayer Bauer. The father died in 1754 when his son was only 11 years of age. The boy had shown great ability and extraordinary intelligence, and his father had taught him everything possible about the rudimentary principles of the money lending business. It had been the father's intention to have his son trained as a rabbi, but death intervened. A few years after his death, Amschel Mayer Bauer was employed by the Oppenheimer Bank as a clerk. He soon proved his natural ability for the banking business and was rewarded with a junior partnership. Later, he returned to Frankfurt, where he secured control and ownership of the business, which had been established by his father in 1750. The red shield was still proudly displayed over the door. Knowing the secret significance of the red shield, Amschel Mayer Bauer decided to adopt it as the new family name. And the thing is, I'm sorry, but I got to stop right here. This right here is not history. It's not, because that's not how it went about. They converted to Judaism and took on the name Rothschild as a Jewish name in order to, flee from persecution, you want to say. The king had recommended it, and I believe it was over in the Russian Black Sea area that all happened. So this part, I have to say, from my own studies, I could be wrong, though. I could be wrong, and we're just going to continue, but that does cause a little red flag. But let's see what he says. Let's continue here, please. All right. Red shield in German is Rothschild, and thus, or Rothschild, and thus the House of Rothschild came into being. Amschel Mayer Bauer lived until 1812. He had 5 sons. All of them were specially trained to become captains of high finance. Nathan, one of the sons, showed exceptional ability and at the age of 21 went to England with the definite purpose of securing control of the Bank of England. The purpose was to use this control to work in conjunction with his father and brothers to set up, consolidate an international banking monopoly in Europe. Now, this stuff is true. The combined wealth of the international banking pool could then be used to further the secret ambitions his father had made known to all his sons. To prove his ability, Nathan Rothschild turned £20,000 with which he had been entrusted into $60,000 in 3 years. In studying the world revolutionary movement, it is important to remember that the red flag was the symbol of the French Revolution and every revolution since. More significant still is the fact that when Lenin, financed by international bankers, overthrew the Russian government and established the first totalitarian dictatorship in 1917, the design of the flag was a red flag with a hammer and sickle, and the Star of Judea imposed. In 1773, when Mayer Rothschild was only 30 years old, he invited 12 other wealthy and influential men to meet him in Frankfurt. His purpose was to convince them that if they agreed to pool the resources, they could then finance and control the world revolutionary movement and use it in their manual of action to win ultimate control of the wealth, natural resources, and manpower of the entire world. Rothschild revealed how the English Revolution had been organized. He pointed out the mistakes and errors that had been made. The revolutionary period had been too long. The elimination of reactionaries had not been accomplished with sufficient speed and ruthlessness. The planned reign of terror by which the subjugation of the masses was to be accomplished speedily had not been put into effective operation, even after all these mistakes had been the initial purpose of the revolution had been achieved. The bankers who instigated the revolution had established control of the national economy and consolidated the national debt. By means of intrigue carried out an international scale, they had increased the national debt steadily by loaning the money to fight the wars and rebellions they had fomented since 1694. Basing his arguments on logic and sound reasoning, Mayer Rothschild pointed out that the financial result obtained as the result of the English Revolution would be as nothing when compared to the financial rewards to be obtained by a French Revolution, provided those present agreed to unity of purpose and put into effect his carefully thought out and revised revolutionary plan. The project would be backed by all the power that could be purchased with their pooled resources. This agreement reached, Mayer Rothschild unfolded his revolutionary plan. By clever manipulation of their combined wealth, it would be possible to create such adverse economic conditions that the masses would be reduced to a state bordering on starvation by unemployment. By use of cleverly conceived propaganda, it would be easy to place the blame for the adverse economic conditions on the king, his court, the nobles, the church, industrialists, and the employees of labor. Their paid propagandists would arouse feelings of hatred and revenge against the ruling classes by exposing all real and alleged cases of extravagance, licentious conduct, injustice, oppression, and persecution. They would also invent infamies to bring into disrepute others who might, if left alone, interfere with their overall plans. After the general introduction to build up an enthusiastic reception for the plot he was about to unfold, Rothschild turned to a manuscript and proceeded to read a carefully prepared plan of action. The following is what I have been assured. And then somebody, I see somebody writes little things in here. I didn't know you could do that. Well, I'm not going to do it. It's because it says by whom and based on what. That's what it says. Is a condensed version of the plot by which the conspirators hoped to obtain ultimate undisputed control of the wealth, natural resources, and manpower of the entire world. Number 1, the speaker started to unfold the plot by saying that because the majority of men were inclined to evil rather than to do good, the best result in governing them could be obtained by using violence and terrorism and not by academic discussions. The speaker reasoned that in the beginning, human society had been subject to brutal and blind force, which was afterwards changed to law. He argued that law was force only in disguise. He reasoned it was logical to conclude that by the laws of nature, right lies in force. Number 2, he next asserted that political freedom is an idea and not a fact. He stated that in order to usurp political power, all that was necessary was to preach liberalism, so that the electorate, for the sake of an idea, would yield some of their power and prerogatives, which the plotters could then gather together into their own hands. Number 3. The speaker asserted that the power of gold had usurped the power of liberal rulers, even then, i.e., 1773. He reminded his audience that there had been a time when faith had ruled, but stated that once freedom had been substituted for faith, the people did not know how to use it in moderation. He argued that because of this fact, it was logical to assume that they could use the idea of freedom to bring about class wars. He pointed out that it was immaterial to the success of his plan whether the established governments were destroyed by internal or external foes, because the victor had of necessity to seek the aid of capital, which is entirely in our hands. Number 4, he argued that the use of any and all means to reach their final goal was justified on the grounds that the ruler who governed by the moral code was not a skilled politician, because he left himself vulnerable and in an unstable position on his throne. He said, those who wish to rule must have recourse to cunning and to make-believe, because great national qualities like frankness and honesty are vices in politics. Number 5, he asserted our right lies in force. The word right is an abstract thought and proves nothing. I find a new right, to attack by the right of the strong, and to scatter to the winds all existing forces of order and regulation, to reconstruct all existing institutions, and to become the sovereign lord of all those who left to us the rights to their power by laying them down voluntarily in their liberalism. 6. He then admonished his listeners with these words: the power of our resources must remain invisible until the very moment when it has gained such strength that no cunning or force can undermine it. He warned them that any deviation from the line of the strategic plan he was making known to them would risk bringing to naught the labors of centuries. 7. He next advocated the use of mob psychology to obtain control of the masses. He reasoned that the might of the mob is blind, senseless, and unreasoning, and ever at the mercy of suggestion from any side. He stated, only a despotic ruler can rule the mob efficiently, because without absolute despotism, there can be no existence for civilization, which was carried out not by the masses, but by their guide, whosoever that person might be. He warned, the moment the mob seizes freedom in its hand, it quickly turns to anarchy. Number 8. He next advocated that the use of alcoholic liquors, drugs, moral corruption, and all forms of vice be used systematically by their agentors to corrupt the morals of the youth of the nations. He recommended that the special agentors should be trained as tutors, lackeys, governesses, clerks, and by our women in the places of disputation frequented by the goyim. He added, in the number of these last, I count also the so-called social ladies who become voluntary followers of the others in corruption and luxury. We must not stop at bribery, deceit, and treachery when they should serve towards the attainment of our end. So basically, the end justifies the means, what it's saying. Number 9. Turning to politics, he claimed they had the right to seize property by any means and without hesitation, if by doing so they secured submission and sovereignty. He pronounced our state marching along the path of peaceful conquest has the right to replace the horrors of wars by less noticeable and more satisfactory sentences of death necessary to maintain the terror which tends to produce blind submission. Number 10, dealing with the use of slogans. He said, in ancient times, we were the first to put the words liberty, equality, and fraternity into the mouths of the masses. Words repeated to this day by stupid poll parrots. Words which the would-be wise men of the Goyim would make nothing in their own abstractness, and did not note the contradiction of their meaning and interrelation. He claimed the words brought under their direction and control legions who bore our banners with enthusiasm. He reasoned that there is no place in nature for equality, liberty, or fraternity. He said, on the ruins of the natural geological aristocracy of the Goyim, we have set up the aristocracy of money. The qualification for this aristocracy is wealth, which is dependent upon us. And then the person wrote here underneath, it's very light. This would suppose that the speaker felt that hereditary aristocracy is a natural development, social evolution, and is a blessing, and that the gift of statescraft is perpetually passed on from father to son. Was it really his opinion, or was it just visited upon him after the fact by the writer of these original documents, who seems to be in favor of feudalism? So that's very interesting. Number 11, he next expounded his theories regarding war. In 1773, he set down a principle which the governments of Britain and the United States publicly announced as their joint policy in 1939. He said it should be the policy of those present to foment wars, but to direct the peace conferences so that neither the combatants obtain territorial gains. He said the wars should be directed so that the nations engaged on both sides would be placed further in their debt and in the power of our agenters. Number 12, he next dealt with administration. He told those present that they must use their wealth to have candidates chosen for public office who would be servile and obedient to our commands, so they may readily be used as pawns in our game by the learned and ingenious men we will appoint to operate behind the scenes of the government as official advisors. He added, the men we appoint as advisors will have been bred, reared, and trained from childhood in accordance with our ideas to rule the affairs of the whole world. 13. He dealt with propaganda and explained how their combined wealth could control all outlets of public information while they remained in the shade and clear of blame regardless of what the repercussions might be due to the publication of libels, slanders, or untruths. The speaker said, thanks to the press, we have got gold in our hands, notwithstanding the fact that we had to gather it out of the oceans of blood and tears. But it was paid us even though we have sacrificed many of our own people. Each victim on our side is worth 1,000 goyim. 14. He next explained the necessity of having their agentur always come out into the open and appear on the scene when conditions had reached their lowest ebb, and the masses had been subjugated by means of want and terror. He pointed out that when it was time to restore order, they should do it in such a way that the victims would believe they had been the prey of criminals and irresponsibles. He said, by executing the criminals and lunatics after they have carried out our preconceived reign of terror, we can make ourselves appear as the saviors of the oppressed and the champions of the workers. The speaker then added, we are interested in just the opposite, in the diminution, the killing out of the goyim. 15. He next explained how industrial depressions and financial panics could be brought about and used to serve their purpose, saying, enforced unemployment and hunger imposed on the masses because of the power we have to create shortages of food will create the right of capital to rule more surely than it was given to the real aristocracy and by the legal authority of kings. He claimed that by having their agentur control the mob could then be used to wipe out all who dared to stand in their way. 16. The infiltration into continental Freemasonry was next discussed extensively. The speaker stated that their purpose would be to take advantage of the facilities and secrecy of Freemasonry had to offer. He pointed out they could organize their own Grand Orient lodges within Blue Freemasonry in order to carry on their subversive activities and hide the true nature of their work under the cloak of philanthropy. He stated that all members initiated into their Grand Orient lodges should be used for proselytizing purposes and for spreading their atheistic, materialistic ideology among the Goyim. He ended this phrase of discussion with the words, "When the hour strikes for our sovereign Lord of all the world to be crowned, these same hands will sweep away everything that might stand in his way." And then right here down below it says, "Are you saying that anti-Catholic, anti-monarchical, anti-feudalist, anti-Christian, Freemasonry, continental or otherwise was good until the international money power ruined it?" Question mark. So that's somebody asked that, but I don't know where he would get the answers from. I have no clue. Number 17. He next expounded the value of systematic deceptions, pointing out that their agentur should be trained in the use of high-sounding phrases and the use of popular slogans. They should make the masses the most lavish of promises. He observed, the opposite of what has been promised can always be done afterwards. That is of no consequence. He reasoned that by using such words as freedom and liberty, the Goyim could be stirred up to such a pitch of patriotic fervor that they could be made to fight even against the laws of God and nature. He added, and for this reason, after we obtain control of the very name of God, we will be erased from the lexicon of life. Wow. Did he really say that? Number 18. He then detailed the plans for revolutionary war, the art of street fighting, and outlined the pattern for the reign of terror, which he insisted must accompany every revolutionary effort, because it is the most economical way to bring the population to speedy subjection. 19. Diplomacy was next discussed. After all wars, secret diplomacy must be insisted upon in order that our agentur, masquerading as political, financial, and economic advisors, can carry out our mandates without fear of exposing who are the secret power behind national and international affairs. The speaker then told those present that by secret diplomacy they must obtain such control that the nations cannot come to even an inconsiderable private agreement without our secret agents having a hand in it. Number 20. Ultimate world government, the goal. To reach this goal, the speaker told them, it will be necessary to establish huge monopolies, reservoirs of such colossal riches that even the largest fortunes of the Goyim will depend on us to such an extent that they will go to the bottom together with the credit of their governments on the day after the great political smash. The speaker then added, you gentlemen here present who are the economists just strike an estimate of the significance of this combination. Number 21, economic war. Plans to rob the Goyim of their landed properties and industries were then discussed. A combination of high taxes and unfair competition was advocated to bring about the economic ruin of the Goyim as far as their national financial interests and investments were concerned. In the international field, he felt they could be encouraged to price themselves out of the market. This could be achieved by the careful control of raw materials, organized agitation among the workers for shorter hours and higher pay, and by subsidizing competitors. The speaker warned his co-conspirators that they must arrange matters and control conditions so that the increased wages obtained by the workers will not benefit them in any way. 22. Armaments. It was suggested that the building up of armaments, I gotta turn that fan on, sorry guys. Thank God for solar power and generators. Armaments. It was suggested that the building up of armaments for the purpose of making the Goyim destroy each other should be launched on such a colossal scale that in the final analysis there will only be the masses of the proletariat right in the world with a few millionaires devoted to our cause, and police and soldiers sufficient to protect our interests. Number 23, the New Order. The members of the one world government would be appointed by the dictator. He would pick men from amongst the scientists, the economists, the financiers, the industrialists, and from the millionaires because in substance everything will be settled by the question of figures. 24. Importance of youth. The importance of capturing the interest of youth was emphasized with the admonition that our agenters should infiltrate into all classes and levels of society and government for the purpose of fooling, bemusing, and corrupting the younger members of society by teaching them theories and principles we know to be false. 25. National and international laws should not be changed, but should be used as they are to destroy the civilization of the Goyim, merely by twisting them into a contradiction of the interpretation which first masks the law and afterwards hides it altogether. Our ultimate aim is to substitute arbitration for law. The speaker then told his listeners, "You may think the Goyim will rise upon us with arms, but in the West, we have against this possibility an organization of such appalling terror that the very stoutest hearts quail. The underground, the metropolitans, the subterranean corridors. These will be established in the capitals and cities of all countries before that danger threatens." The use of the word West was great significance. It makes it plain the Rothschilds was addressing men who had joined the World Revolutionary Movement, which was started in the Pale of Settlement in the East. It must be remembered that before Amschel Moses Bauer settled down in Frankfurt, Germany, he had followed his trade as a gold and silversmith, traveling extensively to the east of Europe, where he had undoubtedly met the men his son, Amschel Mayer, addressed after he developed from a money lender into a banker and established the House of Rothschild in the Judean Strasse, where the above meeting is said to have taken place in 1773. So I see where now they're reconciling where he was over in the east. I knew that he was. It was like, that didn't make any sense. As far as can be ascertained, the original plan of the conspiracy ended at the point where it terminated above. I am satisfied that the documents which fell into the hands of Professor S. Nihilus in 1901, and which he published under the title The Jewish Peril in 1905 in Russia, were an enlargement of the original plot. There appears, I don't know what I just did. I just did something crazy. Hold on 1 minute. Forgive me. Okay. Hold on 1 minute. I'm so sorry. Where am I at? I'm just going to start here again. I'm so sorry. Forgive me. As far as can be ascertained, the original plan of the conspiracy ended at the point where it terminated above. I am satisfied that the documents which fell into the hands of Professor S. Nihilus in 1901, and which he published under the title The Jewish Peril in 1905 in Russia, were an enlargement of the original plot. There appears to be no change in the first section, but various editions disclose how the conspirators had used Darwinism, Marxism, and even Nazism, which is Nietzscheism. That's before Nazism came in, but I can't pronounce that. Nietzscheism. More important still, the documents discovered in 1901 disclose how Zionism was to be used. It must be remembered that Zionism was only organized in 1897. This matter is referred to later when the intrigue leading up to the abdication of King Edward VIII is explained. The translation Mr. Victor Marston made of The Jewish Peril was published by the Britain Publishing Society, London, England, under the title The Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion in 1921. This book is also discussed. It appears logical to say that the discovery of the latter document confirms the existence of the earlier one. Little, if anything, is changed, but considerable material is added, probably due to the rapid development of the international conspiracy. The only point upon which there seems to be grounds for disagreement is in regard to the titles chosen by Professor Nihilus and Mr. Marsden in their books. Mr. Marsden definitely states the contents of his book are the protocols of the meetings of the learned elders of Zion, whereas it would appear it was a plot presented to moneylenders, goldsmiths, industrialists, economists, and others by Amschel Mayer Rothschild, who had graduated from money lender to bank. Once the spirit of revolt against constituted authority had been aroused within the hearts and minds of the masses, the actual revolutionary effort would be carried out under the impetus of a preconceived reign of terror. The reign of terror could be conceived by the leaders of the Jewish Illuminati. They, in turn, would have their agents infiltrate into the newly organized French Freemasonry and establish therein lodges of Grand Orient Masonry to be used as the revolutionary underground and as their instrument for proselytizing the doctrine of atheistic, dialectical, and historical materialism. Rothschild ended his discourse by pointing out that if proper precautions were taken, their connection with the revolutionary movement need never be known. The question may well be asked, how can it be proved these secret meetings were held? And if they were held, how is it possible to prove what matters were discussed at such meetings? The answer is simple. The devilish plot was made known by an act of God. In 1785, a courier was galloping madly on horseback from Frankfurt to Paris, carrying detailed information regarding the world revolutionary movement in general and instructions for the planned French Revolution in particular. The instructions originated with the Jewish Illuminati in Germany and were addressed to Grand Master of the Grand Orient Masons in France. The Grand Orient Lodges had been established as the revolutionary underground by the Duc d'Orleans after he, as Grand Master of French Masonry, had been initiated into the Jewish Illuminati in Frankfurt by Mirabeau. The courier was struck by lightning while passing through Ratisbon and killed. The documents he carried fell into the hands of the police, who turned them over to the Bavarian government. A record of historical events told in chronological order connects the House of Rothschild with the Jewish Illuminati in Frankfurt and the Illuminati within French Freemasonry, known as the Grand Orient Lodges, as will be shown. It has been recorded how the Jewish rabbis claimed the power to interpret the secret and hidden meanings of the writings of Holy Scripture by special revelation obtained through Kabbalah. Claiming to have such powers was of little avail unless they had an organization or instrument in their hands to put the inspiration they claimed to have received into effect. The moneylenders, certain high priests, directors, and elders decided to organize a very secret society to serve their evil purpose. They named it the Illuminati. The word Illuminati is derived from the word Lucifer, which means bearer of the light or being of extraordinary brilliance. Therefore, the Illuminati was organized to carry out the inspiration given to the high priest by Lucifer during the performance of their Kabbalistic rites. Thus, Christ is proved, I don't know if that's the dogs or not, Christ is proved justified when he named them of the synagogue of Satan. The Supreme Council of the Jewish Illuminati, number 13. They were, and still remain, the executive body of the Council of 33. The heads of the Jewish Illuminati claimed to possess superlative knowledge in everything pertaining to religious doctrine, religious rites, and religious ceremonies. They were the men who conceived the atheistic, materialistic ideology, which in 1848 was published as the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx. Marx was the nephew of a Jewish rabbi, but he disassociated himself officially from the Jewish high priesthood when designated to perform his important duties, putting into practice once again the joint stock company principle of operation. The reason of the Supreme Court numbered 13 was to remind the members that their one and only duty was to destroy the religion founded by Christ and his 12 apostles. To ensure secrecy and avoid the possibility of Judas-like betrayal, every man initiated into the Illuminati was required to take an oath of unlimited obedience to the head of the Council of 33 and to recognize no mortal as above him. In an organization such as the Illuminati, this meant that every member acknowledged the head of the Council of the 33 as his God upon this earth. This fact remains how high-level communists even today swear an oath that they do not give allegiance to Russia. They don't. They give allegiance only to the head of the directors of the World Revolutionary Movement. The Supreme Council decided they would use the Ingersoll Lodge to organize a campaign by which the agents or cells of the Illuminati would infiltrate into continental Freemasonry and under the cloak of social enjoyment and public philanthropy, organize the revolutionary underground. Those who infiltrated into continental Freemasonry were ordered to establish lodges of the Grand Orient and use them for proselytism so they could quickly contact non-Jews of wealth, position, and influence connected with both church and state. Then by using the age-old methods of bribery, corruption, and graft, they could make them become willing or unwilling disciples of Illuminism. They could make them preach the inversion of the Ten Commandments of God. They could make them advocate atheistic materialism. Once this policy had been decided upon, agents of the Supreme Council contacted the Marquis of Mirabeau as the most likely person in France to serve their ends. He belonged to the nobility. He had great influence in court circles. He had an intimate friend of the Duke d'Orleans, whom they had decided they would use as Frenchman to lead the French Revolution. But more important still, the Marquis of Mirabeau, who was devoid of morals and his licentious excesses had led him into heavily to debt. I said that so wrong. Had led him heavily into debt. It was a simple matter for the moneylenders to have their agents contact Mirabeau, the famous French orator. Under the guise of friends and admirers, they offered to help him out of his financial difficulties. What they actually did was lead him down the primrose path into the very depths of vice and debauchery until he was so deeply in their debt that he was forced to do their bidding. At a meeting to consolidate his debts, Mirabeau was introduced to Moses Mendelssohn, one of the big Jewish financiers who took him in hand. Mendelssohn in due time introduced Mirabeau to a woman famous for her personal beauty and charm, but without moral scruples. This stunning Jewess was married to a man named Herz, but to a man like Mirabeau, the fact that she was married only made her more desirable. It wasn't long before she was spending more time with Mirabeau than she was spending with her husband. Heavily in debt to Mendelssohn, tightly ensnared by Mrs. Herz, Mirabeau was completely helpless. He had swallowed their bait, hook, line, and sinker. But, like good fishermen, they played him gently for a time. If they exerted too great a pressure, their leader might break and their fish might get away. Their next move was to have him initiated into Illuminism. He was sworn to secrecy and unlimited obedience under pain of death. The next move was to lead him into a compromising situation, which mysteriously became public. This method of destroying a man's character became known as the practice of l'infamy. Because of the scandals and organized detraction, Mirabeau was ostracized by many of his social equals. His resentment produced a desire for revenge, and thus he embraced the revolutionary cause. Mirabeau's task was to induce the Duc d'Orleans to lead the revolutionary movement in France. It was implied that once the king had been forced to abdicate, he would become the democratic ruler of France. The real plotters of the French Revolution were careful not to let either Mirabeau or the Duc d'Orleans know they intended to murder the king and queen and thousands of the nobility. They made Mirabeau and the Duc d'Orleans believed that the purpose of the revolution was to free politics and religion from superstition and despotism. Another factor which made the men who were the secret power behind the revolution movement decide that the Duc d'Orleans should be their front man was the fact that he was Grand Master of French Freemasonry. Adam Weishaupt was given the task of adapting the ritual and rites of Illuminism for use of initiation into the Grand Orient Masonry. He also lived in Frankfurt, Germany. Mirabeau introduced the Duc d'Orleans and his friend Talleyrand to Weishaupt, who initiated them into the secrets of the Grand Orient Masonry. By the end of 1773, Philippe, Duc d'Orleans, had introduced the Grand Orient rituals into Freemasonry. By 1788, There were more than 2,000 lodges in France affiliated with the Grand Orient Masonry, and the number of individual adepts exceeded 100,000. Thus, the Jewish Illuminati under Moses Mendelhausen was introduced into continental Freemasonry by Weishaupt under the guise of lodges of the Grand Orient. The Jewish Illuminati next organized secret revolutionary committees within the lodges. Thus, the revolutionary underground directors were established throughout France. Once Mirabeau had succeeded in having the Duc d'Orleans amalgamate the Blue or National Freemasonry in France with the Grand Orient Rites, he led his friend down the same primrose path which had led to his own social ostracism. In exactly 4 years, the Duc d'Orleans was so heavily in debt that he was persuaded to engage in every form of illegal traffic and trade to reciprocate. Thank you, Jesus. It appears our power is on. Very happy about that. Okay. Do I have to? I think after this paragraph I'm going to have to stop because I got to go along and like unhook things and then I'll come back. Okay. Once Mirabeau had succeeded in having the Duc d'Orleans amalgamate the Blue or National Freemasonry in France with the Grand Orient Rites, he led his friend down the same primrose path which had led to his own social ostracism. In exactly 4 years, the Duc d'Orleans was so heavily in debt that he was persuaded to engage in every form of illegal traffic and trade to recuperate his losses. But in some mysterious manner, his ventures always seemed to go wrong, and he lost more and more money. Let's see. I'm going to keep going and almost. Let's see. By 1780, he owed 800,000 livres. Once again, the money lenders came forward and offered him advice in regard to his business transactions and financial aid. They very nicely maneuvered him into the position of signing over to them as security for their loans his palace, his estates, his house, and the Palais Royal. The Duc d'Orleans signed an agreement under which his Jewish financiers were authorized to manage his properties and estate so as to ensnare him sufficient income to meet his financial obligations and leave him a steady, adequate income. The Duc d'Orleans had never been too bright in regard to financial matters. To him, the agreement he signed with his Jewish bankers appeared to be a sound financial deal. They had offered to manage his business affairs and turn them from a dismal failure into a great financial success. What more could he want? It is doubtful if the Duc d'Orleans even suspected that he was, I ain't saying that word, blank hidden deep in the woodpile. It is doubtful if he even suspected he had sold himself body and soul to the agents of the devil, but he had done so. He was completely in their hands. I'm going to stop there because, like I said, I got to go and unplug and do all this other stuff because the power just came back on. So I will be back later. Until then, keep your eyes on Jesus, brothers and sisters. Your nose in the book, which is the Word of God. And let us, you and I, embed the Word of God upon the tablets of our hearts. So you and I will not sin against God or be deceived. I love y'all.